The small city hall stood between a bakery and an old bookstore, a place most people passed without notice. That evening, warm light spilled from its windows, and a handwritten sign near the door announced a local music gathering. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a slightly raised stage, where a black piano waited under soft yellow lights. The event was meant to be casual. It was not a grand concert, just a chance for local musicians to perform for neighbors, teachers, and a few invited judges from nearby schools. People arrived in groups, laughing and talking, their voices filling the room with easy noise. Some performers wore neat outfits and carried folders of sheet music. They greeted one another with confidence, sharing stories about lessons, competitions, and past applause. The air carried the smell of old wood, polished keys, and fresh paper programs. Near the back of the hall, a woman stepped inside alone. She paused for a moment, taking in the room as if measuring its mood. Her clothes were clean but simple, nothing that drew attention. She did not carry a fancy case or a thick stack of music sheets. Instead, she held a thin notebook pressed close to her side. After a brief glance around, she chose a seat near the aisle and sat quietly, her posture calm and still. No one rushed to greet her. Most eyes were fixed on familiar faces at the front of the room. A few people noticed her briefly, then looked away. She seemed like someone who might be a student, or perhaps a last-minute addition. There was nothing about her that suggested she would stand out. On stage, event helpers moved chairs and checked microphones. One of them looked down at a list and spoke in a low voice to another helper. They glanced toward the back of the room, then toward the piano. After a short discussion, one of them walked down the aisle and stopped beside the woman. With a polite but rushed tone, the helper explained that there had been a small change in the order. They asked if she would be willing to play earlier than planned. The request sounded more like an instruction than a question. She nodded without hesitation. Her expression did not change, and she offered a quiet thank you as she stood and followed the helper toward the stage. A few nearby audience members watched with mild interest. Some whispered to each other, guessing she might be a beginner chosen to fill time while others prepared. One person shrugged and said it was probably just a simple piece, something like to open the evening. At the side of the stage, the judges sat behind a long table. They scanned their papers, barely looking up as the woman approached. One judge leaned toward another and murmured that they should ask her to keep it short. Another judge nodded, already writing notes before hearing a single note. The helper gestured toward the piano and quietly suggested she play something easy, just a simple song to warm up the room. The words were meant to be kind, but they carried an assumption. Simple meant safe. Simple meant nothing surprising. She listened without reacting. There was no sign of offense or pride in her face. She simply agreed. When she reached the piano, she placed her notebook gently on the floor beside the bench and sat down. The bench creaked softly as she adjusted it, pulling it slightly closer to the keys. The room had settled into a half-listening state. People were still shifting in their seats, checking phones and flipping through programs. A few children whispered to their parents. No one seemed prepared for anything more than background music. She rested her hands in her lap for a moment and looked at the piano. The instrument showed signs of age, with faint scratches along its side and keys worn smooth from years of use. She lifted her hands slowly and placed her fingers on the keys, not yet pressing them. Her shoulders relaxed and her breathing became steady. The silence stretched just long enough for a few people to glance up. One judge cleared their throat, ready to signal her to begin if she waited too long. Before that could happen, she pressed the first key. The sound was soft, almost fragile, but clear. It was a single note, followed by another, spaced carefully. The melody was simple, just as requested. A few people nodded, as if their expectations were confirmed. This was exactly what they thought it would be, but there was something in the way she played those early notes. Each one landed with purpose. The timing was careful, not rushed, not lazy. The melody breathed, rising and falling like a quiet voice telling a story. Without realizing it, people began to listen. A person in the front row lowered their phone. A child stopped whispering. Even the helper near the stage turned back to watch. The judges, who had been writing, slowed their pens and looked up. The woman's face remained calm. She did not look at the audience or the judges. Her eyes were focused on the keys, but not in a tense way. Her fingers moved with ease, as if they knew the path without thought. The simple song continued, but small details began to appear. A gentle change in volume here. A pause held just a little longer than expected. These choices gave the music shape and feeling. It was still simple on the surface, yet it carried emotion that reached across the room. People began to sit straighter. The casual noise faded completely. The hall, which had felt loose and unfocused moments before, now felt still. The sound of the piano filled the space without being loud. It wrapped around the audience, pulling them in. One judge leaned forward, resting elbows on the table. Another judge stopped writing entirely. They exchanged a quick look, the kind that carries a question without words. The woman's hands moved with steady control. There was no showy movement, no dramatic lifting of arms. Everything was precise and natural. The music flowed as if it had always been meant to be played exactly this way. At the back of the room, someone whispered that the tone was unusually clean. Another person replied that it felt different from the rehearsals earlier. A quiet sense of curiosity spread, replacing the early boredom. The melody reached a gentle ending, and for a brief moment there was silence. Not the awkward kind, but a soft pause, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The woman did not look up. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys. Ready to continue, a judge nodded slowly, no longer dismissive. Whatever this was, it was not just a warm-up anymore. The simple song had done its job, but it had also opened a door. As the woman shifted slightly on the bench, preparing for the next part of her performance, the audience sensed that something more was coming. They did not yet know what it would be, only that the assumptions they had made at the start of the evening no longer felt certain. The hall remained silent, waiting, as the woman's fingers hovered over the keys, ready to reveal what lay beyond the simple beginning. The pause after the simple melody felt longer than it really was. No one spoke. No one moved. The woman sat still at the piano, her fingers hovering just above the keys. It was as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Then she lowered her hands again. The next notes did not come softly this time. They were still gentle, but there was more weight behind them. The melody changed direction, moving deeper, richer. It was no longer just a warm and friendly tune. It carried feeling, like a memory slowly rising to the surface. A few people in the audience leaned forward without realizing it. One older listener folded their hands together. Another rested their chin on their palm, eyes fixed on the stage. The piano sounded fuller now, filling the hall with a tone that felt close and personal. The judges noticed the change immediately. One of them straightened in their chair. Another reached for their paper, then stopped, unsure what to write. This was no longer something to measure with quick notes. The woman's face remained calm, but there was focus there now. Her eyes followed her hands as they moved across the keys, not rushed, not stiff. Every note seemed chosen with care. She played as if she was speaking directly to the piano, telling it a story it already knew. The music began to grow. Small runs appeared, flowing smoothly from one section to another. The rhythm shifted, becoming more complex, yet never messy. Even listeners with little knowledge of music could feel that something special was happening. A person near the aisle quietly whispered that this did not sound like a beginner at all. The whisper was met with a soft nod. Others had begun to think the same thing. The woman's hands crossed briefly, then returned to their places with ease. The sound rose and fell like gentle waves. There was control in every movement, but also freedom, as if she trusted the music completely. The hall felt different now. Earlier, it had been a place of casual noise and low expectations. Now it felt almost private, like everyone had been invited into a shared moment. Even the air seemed still. At the judges' table, one judge leaned toward another and quietly asked if they recognized the piece. The others shook their heads slowly, eyes never leaving the woman's hands. It did not matter if the piece was known or not. What mattered was how it was being played. The music softened again, pulling back just when it felt strongest. The woman slowed the tempo, letting the notes stretch and breathe. This change made the audience listen even more closely. Every pause felt meaningful. A young listener in the front row blinked rapidly, as if surprised by the emotion rising inside them. They did not understand why they felt this way, only that the music was reaching somewhere deep. The woman's shoulders lifted slightly as the melody climbed. Then her hands moved lower, bringing the sound back down, grounding it. The balance was perfect. Nothing felt forced. Someone near the back of the hall let out a quiet breath they did not realize they were holding. Another person shifted in their seat, suddenly aware of how silent the room had become. The judges were no longer watching like evaluators. They were listening like everyone else. One of them rested a hand over their mouth, eyes thoughtful. Another nodded slowly, as if recognizing skill that could not be taught easily. The piano seemed to respond to the woman's touch, Though it was old, its sound was clear and warm. Each key spoke without resistance. It was as if the instrument trusted her. The music grew stronger again, this time with confidence. The notes moved faster, yet remained clean. Her fingers glided across the keys, never striking them harshly. The sound filled the room, but it did not overwhelm. A listener who had planned to leave early stayed in their seat. Another forgot about the time completely. The world outside the hall faded away. The woman's expression changed just slightly, not into a smile, but into something deeper. It was the look of someone fully present, fully connected to what they were doing. The melody shifted once more, hinting at something larger. It no longer felt like a simple song at all. It felt like the beginning of a journey. One judge finally picked up their pen again, then put it back down. There were no quick words that could capture this moment. As the woman played on, the audience began to understand that this performance was not about showing off. It was about sharing something honest, something earned. The final notes of this section slowed, then softened. They settled gently into the quiet room, like dust floating down after being stirred. When her hands came to rest, the silence returned. This time it was heavier, filled with feeling. No one clapped yet. No one dared to break the moment. The woman remained still, eyes on the keys. She had not finished. That much was clear. Somewhere in the audience, a thought passed from one person to another without words. They had expected a simple song. Instead, they were being invited into something far greater. The hall waited, completely focused, as the woman prepared to continue, the promise of something unforgettable hanging in the air. The woman lifted her hands again, and this time there was no hesitation. The next notes came with quiet strength, as if she had crossed an invisible line. The melody moved forward with purpose, no longer testing the space, but claiming it. The sound grew richer and more layered. What began as a gentle piece now revealed hidden depth. The left hand carried a steady foundation while the right hand shaped the story above it. Together, they formed something complete and alive. People in the audience felt it before they understood it. Their bodies leaned in, their faces softened. The music no longer felt like something they were listening to. It felt like something happening to them. The woman's posture remained relaxed, but there was power in her stillness. Her fingers moved faster now, yet every note remained clear. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was careless. Each sound landed exactly where it should. At the judges' table, one judge slowly pushed their chair back, standing just slightly, as if trying to see better. Another judge clasped their hands together, eyes shining with interest. This was no longer a small local performance in their minds. The piano responded with a full voice. Notes rolled outward, filling the hall from floor to ceiling. The old instrument seemed renewed, as if grateful for the chance to speak so freely. A listener near the front felt a tightness in their chest and did not know why. Another brushed at their eyes, surprised to find them wet. The music was touching places words could not reach. The woman's expression changed again, deeper now. Her brow lowered slightly, not in strain, but in focus. She was no longer aware of the room, the judges, or the expectations placed on her earlier. There was only the piano and the story unfolding beneath her hands. The melody rose suddenly, bold and clear. It was no longer simple in any sense. It carried complexity, emotion, and skill woven together so smoothly that even those unfamiliar with music could feel its greatness. A quiet gasp moved through the audience as a fast passage flowed from her fingers. It was precise, controlled, and fearless. No notes were missed. No sound was harsh. Someone whispered that this was the kind of playing heard only in large halls, not places like this. Another nodded without looking away. The woman slowed again, letting the energy settle. The contrast made the next notes feel even more powerful. The music breathed, rising and falling like a living thing. One judge reached for a glass of water, then forgot to drink it. Another shook their head slowly, a small smile forming without permission. They were no longer questioning her skill. They were witnessing it. The audience sat completely still. Even the smallest movement felt too loud. The only sound was the piano, clear and steady. The woman's left hand began a deeper pattern, grounding the music, while the right hand danced above it. The balance was perfect. It felt both strong and gentle at the same time. A listener in the back closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Another stared at the woman's hands, unable to believe how easily they moved. The music carried a sense of struggle now, followed by release. It told of effort, patience, and long hours spent alone with the keys. Though no words were spoken, the story was clear. The woman leaned slightly forward, fully inside the moment. Her fingers moved with confidence earned through years, not luck. This was not a performance meant to impress. It was an offering. A quiet respect settled over the room. The early smiles and doubtful looks were gone. In their place was something deeper. The melody built again, reaching a strong and shining peak. The sound filled every corner of the hall. It was powerful, but never overwhelming. It lifted without pushing. Several audience members felt chills move up their arms. One pressed a hand to their chest, breathing slowly. The music felt personal, as if it had been written for each listener alone. At the judges' table, one judge finally whispered a single word, barely audible. Mastery. The woman's hands moved faster still, yet her shoulders stayed relaxed. Her breathing remained steady. There was no sign of fear or doubt. Then, just as suddenly, the music softened. The pace slowed. The sound thinned into something delicate and honest. It felt like the quiet after a storm. The audience leaned in even closer, afraid to miss a single note. The silence between sounds became as important as the sounds themselves. The woman held a final note longer than expected, letting it fade naturally into the air. When it was gone, she did not move. The hall was silent again. But this silence was different. It was full, heavy with feeling. No one moved. No one spoke. For a brief moment, it felt as though the room itself had forgotten how to breathe. Then someone exhaled softly. Another shifted slightly in their seat. Life slowly returned to the space. The woman's hands rested on the keys. Her head bowed slightly. She was not finished yet, but something important had already changed. The audience now understood that what they were witnessing was rare. They had come expecting something simple. Instead, they were being shown true depth. The woman lifted her hands once more, preparing to continue. Every eye in the room followed her. Every heart waited, whatever came next. It was clear that this performance would be remembered long after the chairs were folded and the lights turned off. The piano waited. The room waited. And so did the world beyond the hall, unaware that something extraordinary was unfolding inside. The woman did not rush into the next section. She let the silence settle, giving the room time to absorb what had already been shared. The quiet felt heavy but gentle, like a pause between breaths. Then her fingers moved again. The new melody began low and steady. It felt grounded, almost reflective, as if looking back on a long road traveled. The sound was warm and full, wrapping around the listeners like a familiar memory. People shifted in their seats, not from restlessness, but from emotion. Some felt a strange sense of recognition, as if the music was touching moments from their own lives. No one spoke. No one wanted to break the connection. The woman's hands moved with calm confidence. There was no tension in her wrists, no strain in her shoulders. Every movement showed deep understanding, the kind that comes only from years of quiet practice. At the judges' table, one judge slowly removed their glasses and set them down. Another leaned back, exhaling slowly. They were no longer thinking about scores or rankings. They were listening as people, not evaluators. The melody grew richer, adding layers that blended smoothly together. It felt thoughtful, almost wise. The music did not rush to impress. It took its time, allowing each phrase to fully exist. A listener near the aisle clasped their hands together, eyes closed. Another nodded gently, as if the rhythm matched their heartbeat. The woman's expression softened. There was a sense of peace in her face now, mixed with quiet strength. She seemed fully at home at the piano, as if this was where she belonged. The sound rose slowly, building with care. The piano filled the hall, not with force, but with presence. Every corner of the room felt touched by the music. One judge whispered that this kind of control could not be taught quickly. Another nodded in agreement, their face thoughtful. The woman leaned slightly into the keys, drawing out a deeper tone. The music carried a sense of resilience, of moving forward despite difficulty. It felt honest and earned out in the audience. Someone wiped their eyes quickly, hoping no one noticed. Another person pressed their lips together, moved by feelings they had not expected to feel that evening. The melody shifted again, introducing a gentle brightness. It felt like light breaking through clouds. The change was subtle, but powerful. The woman's fingers danced lightly now, still controlled, but freer. The notes shimmered, lifting the mood without losing depth. The judges watched closely, not searching for mistakes, but marveling at how naturally everything flowed. There was no sense of effort, only clarity. The music reached another quiet peak, then eased back. The balance between strength and softness felt perfect. A listener in the back leaned against the wall, completely still. Time seemed to move differently inside the hall. The woman slowed the tempo, letting the notes stretch. Each sound lingered just long enough to be felt. The piano seemed to breathe with her, responding to every touch. Though old, it sounded alive, as if grateful for such careful hands. The audience felt carried along, guided gently through emotion without being pushed. The music respected the listener. One judge rested their chin on their hand, eyes fixed on the woman. They had seen many performances, but few like this. The melody grew quieter, drawing everyone closer. The hall felt intimate, as if the walls had moved inward. The woman held a chord, letting it fade slowly. The sound disappeared into silence, but its presence remained. No one moved. The quiet felt sacred. Then, without warning, the woman began again, this time with renewed strength. The shift was bold but smooth. The music surged forward, confident and clear. It carried purpose, like a statement finally spoken aloud. The audience felt a spark of energy. Heads lifted, hearts beat faster. The woman's hands moved swiftly, but never wildly. Every note landed cleanly, perfectly placed. The judges exchanged looks filled with respect. This was not just talent. It was mastery shaped by patience. The melody soared, filling the hall with sound that felt both powerful and controlled. It lifted the listeners, carrying them higher. Some felt chills, others smiled through tears. The music reached everyone differently, yet united them all. The woman's posture remained steady. Her focus never broke. As the music approached its end, the intensity softened again. The sound grew warmer, gentler, like a final embrace. The woman slowed her hands, easing the melody toward rest. Each note felt like a farewell. The final chord of this section settled into the room, deep and full. Silence followed, thicker than before. No one clapped. Not yet. The woman remained still, hands resting lightly on the keys. Her breathing was calm, her expression peaceful. The audience felt the weight of what they had just experienced. Something inside the room had shifted. The judges sat quietly, knowing that whatever came next would only deepen what had already been revealed. The woman lifted her hands slightly, preparing for the final part of her performance. Every eye remained fixed on her. The hall waited once more, united in quiet anticipation. The woman took one last quiet breath. Her hands hovered above the keys, steady and sure. The room felt closer now, as if everyone had moved nearer without standing up. She lowered her fingers and began. The opening notes of the final section were clear and confident. They carried a sense of arrival, as if the music had been walking toward this moment all along. The sound was full but controlled, strong without being loud. The audience felt it immediately. Something inside them shifted. This was the moment everything had been leading to. The woman's posture stayed relaxed, but there was purpose in every movement. Her fingers moved with ease earned through years of quiet effort. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt uncertain. The melody grew richer, weaving together ideas from earlier parts. Listeners who had followed closely felt recognition, like hearing a familiar voice return with new strength. At the judges' table, one judge slowly leaned forward again. Another placed both hands flat on the table, eyes fixed on the piano. No one was writing now. The music expanded, filling the hall with confidence. It did not ask for approval. It simply existed, strong and honest. The woman's expression remained calm, but there was light in her eyes. She was fully present, fully connected. The piano sang beneath her hands. Notes flowed smoothly, rising and falling with perfect balance. Even those with no musical training could feel how right it sounded. A listener near the front smiled without realizing it. Another felt a warm pressure behind their eyes and did not fight it. The melody climbed, building energy. The sound grew brighter, clearer. It felt like standing in open air after a long walk. The woman leaned slightly forward, guiding the music higher. Her fingers moved faster now, but never lost control. Every note landed cleanly. A quiet sense of awe moved through the room. People knew they were witnessing something rare. The judges exchanged brief looks, not of surprise anymore, but of respect. The music reached a powerful peak. The sound filled every space, lifting the listeners with it. It felt strong, certain, complete. Some felt chills run along their arms. Others sat very still, afraid to miss even a second. Then, with perfect timing, the woman guided the melody downward. The sound softened, warming into something gentle and sincere. The shift felt natural, like the end of a long sentence spoken with care. The audience followed the change closely. Hearts slowed, breaths deepened. The woman's hands moved with grace, easing the music toward rest. Each note felt meaningful, placed with intention. The piano's sound grew quieter, thinner, but never weak. It felt like a soft light fading at dusk. The final notes came slowly, The woman held the last sound just long enough for it to settle fully into the room. Then she lifted her hands. The silence that followed was deep and complete. It wrapped around everyone, holding the feeling of what had just happened. No one moved. No one spoke. The woman sat still, hands resting in her lap. Her breathing was calm. Her face showed peace, not pride. A single clap broke the silence. Then another. Then many more. The sound of applause rose quickly, filling the hall. People stood from their seats, some without realizing when they had decided to stand. The judges rose as well. Their expressions were open, honest, and full of respect. The woman stood slowly, slightly surprised by the response. She bowed her head once, simply. The applause continued, warm and steady. It was not loud with excitement alone, but deep with appreciation. Some audience members wiped their eyes openly now. Others smiled broadly, sharing looks with strangers who felt the same. The woman stepped back from the piano. She did not raise her arms or gesture for more applause. She simply stood, accepting the moment with quiet grace. One judge finally spoke, thanking her for the performance. The words were simple, but sincere. Another judge added that what they had heard was rare, something that could not be taught quickly or copied easily. The woman listened, nodding politely. She did not interrupt. She did not explain. When asked where she had trained, she answered softly, saying she had learned through time, patience, and listening. The audience listened closely. Her voice was calm, almost shy. The judges thanked her again, inviting her to return for future events. The invitation carried real weight now. The woman thanked them in return. Her words were few. As the event moved forward, people continued to glance toward her, whispering quietly. The room felt changed. She returned to her seat near the aisle. Just as quietly as she had arrived, a person nearby leaned over and whispered that the performance had been unforgettable. The woman smiled gently and nodded. The rest of the evening passed, but nothing felt quite the same. Other performances were kind and appreciated, but the memory of her music lingered. When the event ended and people began to leave, many paused near the piano, looking at it differently now. Outside, the night air felt cool and still. The woman stepped out into it, holding her thin notebook close. No crowd followed her. No cameras waited. She walked calmly down the street. Inside the hall, people continued to talk about what they had heard. Some said it reminded them of why they loved music. Others said it made them feel something they could not name. The judges packed their papers slowly, thoughtful and quiet. The piano sat in silence again, its keys resting. The woman walked on, blending back into the world as easily as she had stepped onto the stage. She did not need to announce who she was. Her music had already spoken, and for everyone who had been there that night, the sound of it would remain, long after the chairs were folded and the lights were turned off.